I don't have mine. I'm at the lovely Lancaster Hotel in downtown Houston because I went and saw Jimmy Carr last night, and I put it at a high probability that I was going to drink too much. So,
attaboy.
There we go.
And when you put it at a high probability, Chuck, that means you're going deep. We know what's happening.
Seems like you ought to ask them for a long-term arrangement while your house is being remediated.
Yeah, exactly.
That may force you to revel and drink too much.
Yes, we
probably. Wait, are you renovating the? Are you renovating one of the oldest historic homes in Rosenberg, Texas?
Hey, you haven't heard the gripe. It turns out I have a massive mold problem, and so I'm literally having to gut the house and redo it. So yeah,
I don't know what the problem is. I breathed that air for I don't know how many nights.
Yeah, you seem fine. I'm.
As I wrote some time ago, I chalk it up to spending a few years in Karachi. So I've got bulletproof
immune system,
respiratory system. Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Hey, anyway, before we jump in to energy news, actually, this is energy news because A&M probably dominates oil and gas across the world in terms of the number of graduates in executive positions.
They'd like to think
Mark,
so.
did you
and
personally
executives?
Did you personally put pressure to have the A&M president resign? What happened, man?
That wasn't me. I communicated with a former colleague and classmate and asked for his prediction, and he said he stays. And literally, wow. I think less than 24 hours after that text exchange, I texted back that Welsh should just resign, and the one word reply to that was an F-bomb. So,
well, what was the controversy? Was this a Charlie Kirk outshoot?
Clearly, he didn't watch BDE last week.
I did not, and I apologize. I was out trying to sell software.
No, it wasn't the Charlie Kirk controversy.
What was it?
It had to do with curriculum and a student who objected to deviation from the course description in the education department, got the professor fired, had some back and forth with General Welsh as a result of that. And then there was some, as I characterize it, misalignment in the timing of who said what when, and a state rep, Brian Harrison, got a hold of it and was relentless in his tweeting, calling for, the chancellor and the Board of Regents to take action. Welsh has to either be fired or step down.
Got it.
Et cetera.
Yeah.
Instituted a university-wide review of all the course descriptions. And I was talking to somebody who's a professor there after that. He said, look, because of all the disclaimers and everything that you have to have in the courses themselves, the syllabus is 7 pages long, which is kind of crazy when you and I look back on our syllabi. Anyway, so Welsh is out.
Used to write it up on the chalkboard, here are the books we're going to read.
Anyway.
That's probably at some fancy private school.
Exactly. Highfalutin Rice University.
That's the latest, and that's the latest update on the A&M saga.
Gotcha. Well, we'll go from A&M saga to Memphis, because I think this is like peak Elon Musk. This is so good.
Yeah, and he's showing everyone how it's done, which is, I think the overarching theme is ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And so what this is all about, and he tweeted out, I think Tuesday, or posted, I should say, since it was Elon, and it's his ex, but he showed an aerial of Colossus 2, which is in Whitehaven. That's actually on the Tennessee side of the Tennessee-Mississippi border. It's a southwestern suburb of Memphis, but very close to the state line. And, touting the fact that it's the first gigawatt AI training data center. And so why is that important? So if you remember, we've been talking about Colossus 1 since it started in a record, I think 134 days in the old Electrolux facility, which is up in the industrial Riverside part of Memphis, just west of downtown. They put, by the time December rolled around, it started in August of last year, was energized in August of last year, 134 days from ground break to energize. I think they've got 200,000 or 300,000 chips now in that facility. And I believe there's 110,000 in this quote unquote new facility. But what he's doing is finding buildings that he can repurpose that have, 1 million square feet. He's also taking advantage of, a lot of, for lack of a better term, it's probably not correct to call them loopholes, but basically moving in an army of temporary generation, gas-fired generation, to get these things up and running. And so speed to power is really the number one all-important priority, and that's what he's proving. So they further went south of Tennessee and just into Mississippi in South Haven and bought, I believe it was a little over 100 acres, which happened to be the site of an old Duke gas-fired power generation site, and are working with Solaris to create behind-the-meter gas-fired generation to the tune of, the hard plan is to 1.1 gigawatts, going to, having an option to go to 1.5 gigawatts plus. The boring companies apparently involved, certainly Tesla, they've got 168 megapacks on this site acting as, we know those facilities need some type of supercapacitor capability because of the fluctuation in the loads. But, he's basically saying we're just going to get this done as nimbly and as quickly as possible and as opportunistically as possible. And so, you've got record times for this scale of facility to come online from ground break to first energize is on the order of 150 days. And they'll ultimately have, but between Colossus 1 and Colossus 2, they're going to have over a million chips.
Now, crossing state lines from Tennessee to Mississippi avoids emissions limits, Mark? What's...
If you're generating in Mississippi, the city was turning up the heat, community groups were turning up the heat because of the 35 turbines that were running at Colossus 1 and creating, allegedly a lot of public health problems, air pollution, et cetera. Memphis and Shelby County are certainly EPA non-attainment zones, so there are particular NOx and SOx limits that you've got to adhere to. What I understand is Memphis Light Gas and Water, MLGW, has since installed a substation at Colossus 1 that cut that turbine usage in half. So that actually happened a lot quicker than I thought it would. I think Colossus 1 is drawing on the order of, at peak, 350 megawatts. I think you're at 200 at Colossus 2, if I'm recalling correctly from the details that I've read on Colossus 2. But, this is moving very quickly to get to giga-scale that no one else seems to be able to replicate.
In some ways, it's like David facing Goliath, but David has 300,000 or whatever, so NVIDIA GPUs in his own power grid. And in some ways, the best way to beat bureaucracy is to outrun it. That's sort of the genius behind Elon, is like, we're just going so fast, there's no way to stop it. And it's clever and one way to beat the government.
I do love the categorization of Elon Musk, the second richest man in the world, as David. But
well, when you compare him to big government,
is he second
he's still
today
small.
Behind Ellison?
Yeah, I don't know where it ranks today, but Ellison's bumped the other day. Supposedly took him to
You
number
can check
one.
that in real time on Bloomberg.
Yeah.
If you have Bloomberg.
Well, I have
Pro.
a buddy that works for Ellison, and I'll tell you, like, Oracle is the quiet giant. They made a lot of their money off those big government contracts, and they hired, they have a huge government business, but they hired the architect from Amazon to build their cloud business, and it's supposedly the best cloud out, and it's the best cloud out there because it's was built after studying everyone else's. The challenge is finding Oracle developers. That's the one challenge with Oracle is a lot of people know Amazon and how to build off of Amazon's cloud, and Microsoft just to some degree. Oracle is a little bit more niche, but supposedly their cloud is fantastic. So Ellison continues just to build wealth. He's not a dumb guy.
Yeah.
A couple of things to answer your question, Kirk. Across the state line, or maybe it was Chuck's question, you're subject to Mississippi's emissions rules. I don't know what those are, but if you're in a less populated area,
they're probably just guidelines. Suggestions.
The other thing is, and Doug Sheridan responded to Doug operates primarily on LinkedIn. He did ask the question, if you're basically generating power in Mississippi and cabling it to a site in Tennessee, despite the fact that it's all behind the meter, not part of the grid, does that ultimately involve FERC? Well, again, I think those questions will be answered later, but we're going to get up and running and then deal with that after.
Well, of course, if you're FERC, the answer is, of course it does. We regulate whatever we want to regulate. That's one of the challenges. But it'll be interesting to watch.
Not saying this is related. I think you both know my son goes to college in Memphis. And I believe it was Tuesday, the day of the announcement. It's not related. I'm not saying it's related, but the notion that the local utility got the substation in, now you've got potentially grid impacts and strain as a result of this mega load coming on in Colossus 1 onto the grid. They did have a multi-hour power outage on a blue sky day. So, college security is sending out emails saying, well, the power's out. And I said, why? And I texted my son I said, you got thunderstorms rolling through? No, we're practicing today. So we'll see. Those types of things are going to, I think, increasingly come forward at the local level. So I wanted to contrast this with a report that RBN put out, I think it was on Monday, talking about their modeling and predictions with respect to Texas data centers. I'm sure both of you have read the RBN piece that I sent around. I think RBN does a great job of really digging into system level details in its research, but they are typically fairly dense reads. So the interesting takeaway, in contrast to what we're seeing in Tennessee and Mississippi with X and Colossus, you had a feature of the top 10 defined as 300 megawatts or greater planned data centers in ERCOT or in Texas. And what was interesting to me about most of those is that there's still a lot of contingency on permitting approval. And 9 out of the 10, the only one being an exception to some level of, if not complete dependency on the grid in ERCOT, was a data center that's being built in Webb County outside of Laredo called, I had to chuckle at this name, Data City. Sounds like Circuit City.
Laredo's Data City.
Laredo's Data City.
So Texas has like 9 gigawatts in queue or proposed. But, the main takeaway from reading through all that is that there's so much inertia in the process. And here Elon is not too far away, a couple of states over, getting it done at literal giga-scale.
Yeah, and behind the meter, supposedly, right?
Yeah. And why more of these top 10 that RBN featured? I expected reading through those, and I kind of scanned it and I said, okay, ERCOT, Encore, ERCOT, some rural electric co-op, whatever, which is defined as grid. So there's some kind of grid dependency. The only one that appears to be completely behind the meter at that scale in Texas is Data City in Webb County.
I mean, the question is if we're dependent upon ERCOT, it's like building your dream house on someone else's foundation. I mean, that it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, maybe they don't have another solution, and I get that because ERCOT does. I mean, all the data centers, all the gas demand is going through ERCOT, so I get it, and it's probably faster to market because we are in the digital age version of California's gold rush, except the gold is really natural gas, and the miners are these AI algorithms. But that's what we're seeing.
So I'm not smart enough to know this, but one of the big things on ERCOT that is different than the other parts of the grid in the United States is ERCOT allows you to connect your power source to the grid under the guise of, hey, we're just going to shut you off if we need to. And that's kind of the deal. And so I think even if you were building theoretically behind the grid, you would still connect to ERCOT because there's always a little extra electricity you'd want to sell to the grid. And if you're overloading the grid in that portion, you just get shut off by ERCOT anyway. So I wonder if that's why 9 out of the 10 are going to be connected to ERCOT. Maybe they don't need to be. And that's different than other parts of the grid where you have to commission a study. You got to understand the load, where things are, and you have to be approved to connect or not connect. So
yeah, I didn't take it that far. I just at a macro level, it's a very different approach.
Let's get a Texas power expert to jump in.
XAI is taking versus.
Yeah.
But here's my question on Texas data centers versus what Elon's doing. If these data centers are so profitable, why do they need grid subsidies and special rate structures? That's what I'm asking. And I understand one argument is, hey, if I'm an NFL owner, if I can get the city, which means other people, not me, to pay for my stadium, I'm going to do that because that just increases my value in the team because I'm not having to pay these big capex. But I understand the strategy. Let's get someone else to pay for. But that's my big question. Why are we catering like it's like Hollywood's coming saying, hey, we'll give you tax rebates because it increases the GDP of the state? I think we should dig into that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where we're talking about in Tennessee and Mississippi, we're not talking about, the highest GDP parts of the country. And so I think there's part of that. The other thing is, XAI, it was cited, has got a burn rate of $1 billion a month.
Shit. That's real money.
And they did sign an agreement, and there you can go on XAI's website, which I guess is now all X since the merger. They did sign an agreement whereby the U.S. government is paying them $200 million for Grok for government. So there's all kinds of things. If somebody can explain me how these general AI providers, the giga-scale, the Groks, the ChatGPT, whatever, what their revenue and profit model is, and we saw I think a critique of that from Cuppy a few weeks ago, that ultimately the amount of capital invested to get to I think X is hell-bent to get to AGI. And so what is the revenue? What is the profit model associated with it? Because the burn rates, as you point out, are really high. And the fact that you're getting some of this, if not a significant portion of it in the form of, power purchase agreement price breaks or tax incentives or whatever, is a reasonable question. I can't answer it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about because if you think about Microsoft's business model these days, it's literally the cloud. We want to sell compute power. So we're a platform. We build tools so other people can build stuff. that uses a lot of compute. And, they have the deal with ChatGPT, OpenAI. And I think that's how these big guys are going to go is we just want people to query, we want them to embed our language in all their processes. So they're querying us and we're going to charge tokens. I wonder if that's a bit of an eyeball type thing in the internet. Remember back you had so many eyeballs looking at a website and that's what it was worth. And, the advertising dollars would come later. But I think ultimately, the big foundational models, that's it. We just want queries and we want small companies using our AI to embed in their processes. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can actually do that because the history of software shows you can be this big platform, but really getting down into nitty gritty type stuff, that usually takes somebody else besides a big guy.
Well said, Chuck.
It happens every once in a while, particularly hungover from Jimmy Carr, who, by the way, last night was hysterical. He's so funny.
Where was he? Where'd you see him?
Bayou Music Center, downtown Houston. Okay. So anyway.
So it wasn't on network TV? The FCC wasn't there?
It was not. It was not.
Anyway, before we get to that,
yes,
which is the capper on this discussion, since we didn't have you last week, let's revisit the IEA. David Blackman put out a LinkedIn post, really, I think paraphrasing the title of which was in shocking about face. And we talked about it a little bit last week, Kirk, which is all of a sudden the IEA is reporting that global decline rates have accelerated to 8%, or what was in 2010 a replacement volume of 4 million barrels a day due to natural decline or cashless decline. It's now 5.5. And so the industry needs to, replacement spending to the tune of $500+ billion a year. We've seen exploration and development spending trend below that over the last decade. And, my long-running rant on the IEA, certainly post the May 2021 net zero report is, leadership has, and messaging related to that has really veered into the realm of advocacy. And so this doesn't surprise anyone in our sphere, but the vast majority of constituents, ordinary citizens, certainly taxpayers, are not, they don't have a great understanding of energy systems and energy markets. We all knew this. We've known it since the beginning of time, at least in our professional lives. I remember my former colleague way back when, Dave Purcell, wrote a seminal report in 1998 in oil and gas. It was a macro report entitled Depletion, the Forgotten Factor. Well, nobody's forgotten it. And I made the point in response to a comment that was made on Blackman's post that, this is not just the IEA. The IEA ran interference for a lot of bad policy over the ensuing 4 or 5 years since the publication of that report. And so what they should have been doing is consistently updating. They knew it. They knew declines were accelerating because you've mixed in certainly more unconventional in the global supply base, along with deep water, which has a shorter plateau, higher initial rate, but it declines pretty steeply as well. So they knew this was coming. And now they're trying to reclaim what I call the analytical moral authority by, getting behind this. Hey, we're shocked and surprised to tell you that global decline rates have accelerated. Well, yeah, no shit.
It's interesting. I don't know how much of this I'm at liberty to say, so I'm going to be a little bit coy. I was with a very prominent CEO of a large energy company within the last couple of weeks, and he has gone through and literally built a detailed model where it's not based on rigs and frac crews, frac spreads, etc. It's literally done by lateral feet of hole drilled. And that's how he's looking at stuff. And he thinks America's down 1 million barrels a day next year. And he's like, and he's happy. He's like, hey, Chuck, I'm going to send you my spreadsheet, beat it up. But, he said lateral feet and performance has been very predictive on production, U.S. production. And he said, my model is saying we're hitting a cliff right now, and boom, down almost 1 million barrels a day.
So 8 million barrels of the 13.5 or thereabouts is unconventional, which has got, in a traditional context, got a screaming decline rate. Well, it's underpinned by, very mature conventional. But those numbers, if you apply the kind of 8% to it, are directionally in the ballpark at least.
Well, and I'm even willing to take a step further that our traditional conventional, as you call it, the decline rates there are higher than they should be because of shale infatuation. I mean, I think that stuff got put on the back burner. The best engineers all became horizontal drillers, shale guys, instead of, managing chemical programs and all the stuff you do for conventional. So it wouldn't surprise me if we were able to isolate those volumes. Their decline's probably worse than it should have been, with more love and care.
Elder abuse.
That's perfect.
All right. We've bitched enough about the IEA. Can we take a 3-week break from the IEA?
Not a chance.
Not a chance. It's just your beef. I love it. All right. What's next?
Hate, man.
Chuck, I wanted to get you kind of involved in last week's discussion and, the whole aftermath of that terrible event. But, we've seen the irresistible temptation to politicize everything as it relates to, the issues, really cultural and social issues. And I think the one that we touched on was free speech, among many other things. And you look at what's been dominating the news flow of the airwaves is the outrage or the glee over Jimmy Kimmel getting suspended.
Right. Yeah, no, the libertarian in me is probably a free speech absolutist. I believe in letting markets take their course. I think Colbert, I think Kimmel, Michael Jordan said it best, Republicans buy tennis shoes too, and I think the fact they went so political limited their audience significantly, and ultimately it was going to die. The thing I don't like is I don't like the FCC chairman threatening to take away the license, because I get it. It's supposed to be there for a public good. It's supposed to be balanced and all, and you can make a case clearly that it's not. I just hate to see government action on this. We need to let markets decide. And so, I mean, I thought Kimmel was one of the funniest people on TV back when he was with Win Ben Stein's Money and The Man Show. I thought he was really very funny. I haven't found his late night show that funny. He just seems kind of bitter and grumpy. So I'm not rejoicing in his show being taken off the air. I wish it had kind of been done in a different way. Just let the market take care of it.
We're going to attach the somewhat dated clip of Johnny Carson talking to Mike Wallace, and forgive those that don't know who Johnny Carson is, but he's the godfather of late night comedy. And he basically said, look, in response to a question about tackling what he called serious issues, he said, why would you do that? He said, I have the ability to do that, but I'm an entertainer. And why would you alienate, at least, he didn't put a number on it, 50% of your audience or more? And that's where, I think we veered way off course, in that entertainers have become, politically active because they do have a platform and they do have social media now.
People say, he'll never take a serious controversy. Well, I have an answer to that. I said, now, tell me the last time that Jack Benny, Red Skelton, any comedian, used his show to do serious issues. That's not what I'm there for. Can't they see that? But you're not. Why do they think that just because you have a Tonight Show that you must deal in serious issues? It's a danger. It's a real danger. Once you start that, you start to get that self-important feeling that what you say has great import. And strangely enough, you could use that show as a forum. You could sway people, and I don't think you should as an entertainer.
I mean, often tell people who express outrage about, things like the Dixie Chicks when they open their mouth over in Europe, and, it costs them a lot of money, but that's not going to prevent me from going to see the Dixie Chicks. I put it in the context of someone who is just an ordinary citizen when it comes to political points of view, and they're free to say whatever they want. That doesn't diminish the talent of what they do. There's probably very little music I would be able to listen to if I put that kind of bar over the the threshold of which I did or did not support this artist through my.
There's only so much Kid Rock we can listen to.
That's right.
I mean, I disagree, but free speech protects you from government persecution, not from institutional consequences. And I've been on this strain arguing about the Oxford Union's president-elect George Abirone, who has been celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination. And actually, he debated and knew Charlie Kirk, which tells you a lot about his moral bankruptcy. But I think the challenge here is with Jimmy Kimmel, it's a business decision. I understand what you said about the FCC, but this was a business decision because his ratings were terrible. And as I've said, all these teachers being fired, good for them. Free speech has consequences, period, end of story. So we all have a responsibility with our words. Now, we're free to say whatever we want, but doesn't mean that, just like a family or an organization, if I'm interviewing someone to work for my company and they love assassination, I'm going to be probably doesn't fit my culture. I'm not going to hire them. I'm not going to persecute them in terms of throw them in jail, but I'm sure going to hold them accountable for those words. And I think that why Charlie Kirk is the huge turning point for conservatives is that he represented Western civilization, humanity. He looked at people with dignity and treated them with respect. He didn't use violence. And in fact, even Ben Shapiro, the great Jew, says that we wouldn't be here without Christianity and Western civilization treating people with this dignity and respect. And I'm kind of go back to Edmund Burke that said the only thing necessary for triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And what's been happening is that conservatives have been super quiet over what's happening over the last 25 to 30 years or more. And Friedrich Hayek said it best in The Road to Serfdom about fascism is weaponizing language to make disagreement seem evil. And if you think about fascism and the true definition, the progressives are playing this book out over and over and over again. We're afraid to speak up because we'll get canceled. Your career suicide. People are going to shun you. Look at what's happening at my alma mater, Stratford High School. These kids are wanting to start a Turning Point USA chapter here in Houston, and people are doxing them and threatening them and and doxing the teachers and trying to threaten them into being silent. And I'm like, this is the time for conservatives that stand for traditional Judeo-Christian values to say no more. We are tired of this narrative, which is false. And I'm okay with Dixie Chicks. Like, I won't go to a Dixie Chicks concert because I'm like, you know what? It's time for us to start saying, we're tired of this. I'm okay with people being opposite of me, but I'm not okay with the narrative being, hey, you're a racist because you spoke up. And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's like this George Abirone from the Oxford Union is vile. And I've been, there's a lot of people on this one. I'm like, Oxford is a fascist organization because they've allowed George in on inferior grades, DEI. This is all public. He hates the institution itself. And it's basically their own Trojan horse. Like, they basically are doubling down to support George because they say free speech when they're destroying the institution that created C.S. Lewis and many other greats. And I think that we finally need to say, you know what? No more of this. We're just going to speak up because we're allowing these false narratives to be told about us and our children. And like, we just have to stop it. We have to.
Yeah. And we know, I just think the proportionality of it, look, Kimmel was drawing 250,000 in his key demographic. That's almost like an
That's
empty
nothing.
Every
I have
night.
more. I have some of my videos that have more than that.
Giving the outrage, the political outrage, oxygen for something so insignificant and so irrelevant. I realize it's kind of a lightning rod figure because of, he's gone into the realm of the unfunny for so long, like Colbert did, and look what happened to Colbert. He was losing, I forgot what I think CBS, $50 million a year. There's only so much, anybody can hold their breath for a minute underwater. Let's see who can do it for 10. I think the networks are a business are saying, look, this is giving ABC cover to cut its losses for a money losing franchise. And, it aligns well with, all the problems we had with ABC Disney over the past 10 years as they've gotten a lot more progressive in not only their programming, but in their corporate behavior. And they've reeled a lot, or they've tried to reel a lot of that back in. I'm just saying that against the backdrop of all the really nefarious stuff that went on with the Twitter files and the FBI strong-arming Meta and the Hunter Biden laptop stuff and just
unbanking people.
Debanking.
Yeah, that's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, so most progressives are not that intelligent, it seems like, but I've heard the word fascism so many times. I'm like, do you even know what the definition of fascism is? Because we're watching it in real time. We've been seeing it. Debanking, institutional communication that is consistent, that if you're against it, you're fired or destroyed or canceled. All these things. It's just coming back to roost.
And a guy who has never been able to help himself and check his rhetoric, Al Gore this week in some Axios interview described, Trump's rollback of alternatives and subsidies, et cetera, against the green agenda as a jihad. I mean, they can't help themselves. Just call them out. And
because my standard go-to periodically when I've had too much to drink on Facebook, when my friends are like, oh my gosh, this is fascism, blah blah blah, I always say what we just said. Can't we go back to the good old days of not being able to say Hunter Biden's laptop is his laptop, question the vaccine? Can we say that ivermectin won a Nobel Prize, et cetera? Those were the good old days. And I always get back, quit making false equivalencies. And I'm like, how is this different? And then then they say, well, when this happens to someone you love, I'm like, a guy lost a job. Jimmy Kimmel is still rich. He is still worth a fortune. I mean, Charlie Kirk's kids lost their father. A wife lost her husband. We lost Charlie Kirk. I mean, I agree. It's not equivalent. It's much worse.
I want to go back to restrictions on the public airwaves, back to the George Carlin days, the 7 words you can't say on TV. That's our biggest problem.
By the way, the funniest thing Jeff Ross has ever said at a roast was the roast of Bob Saget. And he said, in honor of George Carlin, I am going to say 7 words that will never be said on TV. And the Emmy goes to Bob Saget.
That's awesome.
Look, guys, this is a time, and I think for our listeners, I'd love to leave it with the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I think we need to realize that sometimes we have to stand up and fight because there's no one left.
And that's why we're going to keep talking about the IEA.
We've allowed We've allowed institutions to be infiltrated, and now things that seem common sense are now looked down upon. And you're a racist, you're an Islamophobe. I mean, we live in a time where the mayor of one of our cities has told a resident that they're not welcome in their city because they questioned the city renaming one of the streets for a special temporary purpose after I don't think he was Hezbollah, but he basically Islamic militant.
It was Hezbollah.
I'm like, so,
Dearborn, Michigan.
A resident of Dearborn's like, I don't think this is appropriate. And the guy goes, you're an Islamophobe, which is like, no, I'm actually not an Islamophobe. Now we can go and talk about the religion, but let's just face the fact that I don't think this is appropriate that we are celebrating terrorism. And the guy's like, I'm going to celebrate. We're allowing that to happen. We are allowing this to happen. And now it's time to say this is bullshit. So all these teachers that celebrated assassination, well, it's public education. So fire them because it's not acceptable. I don't want people celebrating assassination to be my children's teachers. If you're in the healthcare business, fire them because you're supposed to be following the Hippocratic Oath. I've been talking about the Good Samaritan. It's like, the poor person that was beat by criminals and no one went over to help them except this Good Samaritan that took care of them. I'm like, that's our job. We are called to love people. And when you see people that are the opposite, I'm not loving, and I'm celebrating that the person on the side of the road is not only has been beat, but they've been killed, and I'm celebrating that. That is the opposite of what this country and what many of us that are Christian or whatever you believe is essential to our code. We need to call it out. Like, this is not in our code. You don't belong here. And it's okay for us to say that. There's many times in my family that I've done some stupid shit, and my dad held me accountable. It's like, go to your room because we don't want you around because that's bullshit. And if you keep doing that, you're no longer welcome in my family. No, I never did that. So I got right back in line. But we need to be speaking up and stop being afraid and letting other people speak. And we're watching it go by because these people's lives are being ruined.
That gets at the essence of, I think, a fundamental in this whole debate is that the response or the antidote for bad speech is more speech, not less. And so use that license provided by the Constitution under the First Amendment to speak without fear of retribution, especially if you're speaking the truth. And in our world, well supported by objective analysis of the data. And suppressing that, I think, at least in our sphere of expertise and influence, has been one of the worst things. This is why I'm very passionate about really holding the IEA to task for what they've done, because there's been a lot of damage as a result of that suppression over the last 5 years of a counterpoint to an agenda that they were clearly fronting for a lot of Western governments that has damaged a lot of people in terms of look at Germany, for example, as it relates to their power costs.
They've destroyed their entire country over a lie. It's crazy. But people and their careers and their livelihoods have been canceled or destroyed because they said climate change is a hoax. Show me the data. Show me why it's better to stop coal. I mean, and we know it's like, well, economics 101, if you have cheap energy, an economy is going to thrive. But we have trained even our children to believe, hey, wait a minute, we don't want cheap energy. We want clean energy, even if it destroys our economy.
Amen, gentlemen. Amen.
That's a good ender.
Said.
But Digital Wildcatters has not taken the bait. They've stood up and they said, no more. Amen.
No more.
Are we still free to use the legacy name?
Probably.
Oh, Collide?
Is that hate speech?
Am I going to get canceled? Yeah. Hey, no. Freedom is, I have a First Amendment rights, but Colin has the freedom to fire my ass for saying Digital Wildcatters, and I would applaud him for that if he so chooses.
That's so funny. All right, boys. Good seeing you guys. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.